Welcome back. The Dow has its worst week in 2 years. Another government shutdown, yet the story consuming the White House is the botched handling of a top aide accused of beating not one but two of his ex-wives. Staff Secretary Rob Porter is out, finally, months after Chief of Staff John Kelly was made aware of allegations Porter beat two ex-wives, and only after a photo of one of those wives with a black eye was made public. Porter was Kelly's right-hand man and responsible for every piece of paper put before the president, but couldn't obtain the security clearance from the FBI because of the red flags in his background check. And joining us for more is Christine Hughes of the Sarasota County Republican Party, former State Representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Jacob Ogles, the political editor of SRQ magazine. Welcome to you all. And Christine, let me start with you. As a woman and as a Republican, what do you make not only of what happened in the White House this week, General Kelly's actions, but also the president's comments today?
Well, you know, it's hard really to understand what happened from the beginning. Apparently, Porter said that he told the FBI he had some issues. I don't understand why that wasn't communicated all the way up. I don't know all the channels. Kelly came in later. Rebus was the chief of staff in the beginning. So Porter said to the president, it was fabricated and expect this to come out, but it's not true. All I'm saying to you is there's a lot of he said, she said on this. But from if all of this is true, I think it should start with the vetting of the issue. I think the president was commenting on the job that he had done and stayed away from any personal comment.
Why don't we just take a look first at what the president had to say today?
Well, we wish him well. He worked very hard. I found out about it recently and I was surprised by it. But we certainly wish him well. It's a obviously tough time for him. He did a very good job when he was in the White House.
It seems what's missing there is any reference to the women who were allegedly beaten.
Well, I agree with you on that. I don't know what else to say about it. I think he was just, I don't know what the question was that he was responding to in this segment here. I think he was just saying, you know, he did a good job, but apparently Kelly had said he had never seen the photographs. I don't know how much information Kelly had when he came in as chief of staff.
Well, there were other comments today too, and including the former Vice President Joe Biden, who had this to say.
A statement from the president saying he wishes him luck. He has so much talent. That's like saying that axe murderer out there, he's a great painter.
Jacob, I would imagine that this might have an impact on a lot of women voters, both Republican and Democrats, as we get into the midterms, and we have a special election coming up.
Well, it's certainly not a news story that the administration or the Republican Party generally wants to see dominating the headlines. I wonder how much length it's got. Honestly, Rob Porter is a figure who we weren't all very familiar with a week ago, so it's not the same as if a well-known figure suddenly made the headline for these reasons. I think the real question is whether this is going to affect John Kelly's tenure in the White House, and that's what's going to determine the long-term impact of this.
Keith, should it?
Should it affect his tenure? I think it should. I think this was more than tone deafness. You know, we're going through a cultural moment right now where women are standing up and saying we're not accepting being harassed, we're not accepting being groped, we're not accepting being pushed around, and that's a great thing. You know, we're in a moment when it's not really a partisan issue, it's across the board. People are saying we're not going to accept this, and decent men are standing up and saying the same thing. And in the context of that conversation, to not think it was important that this information was out there and not to pursue it, he should go.
All right. We are just getting warmed up. We'll have much more in the week in Washington right after we check the first alert weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. We're talking about the week in Washington, and joining us for more are Christine Hughes of the Sarasota County Republican Party, former State Representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Jacob Ogles, the political editor of SRQ magazine. So you may have missed this while you were sleeping, but we had another government shutdown. It was short-lived. What's amazing about this is that both Democrats and Republicans got together for a budget deal, but it was held up for hours by Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who took to the floor and said this.
I'm here tonight is to put people on the spot. I want people to feel uncomfortable. I want them to have to answer people at home who said, how come you were against President Obama's deficits, and then how come you're for Republican deficits? Isn't that the very definition of intellectual dishonesty? If you were against President Obama's deficits and now you're for the Republican deficits, isn't that the very definition of hypocrisy?
Does he have a point, Christine?
No, I think that the Republicans as a whole wanted very much to get the military spending back on track. So the Pentagon budget won in this. And,
right.
And that was really driven by it.
But during the 8 years of President Obama, what you heard consistently from the Republican Party is concern about the ballooning budget deficit. And now, with this tax plan that we just passed, the alone $1.5 trillion, how are Republicans not concerned about more government spending now?
I think that the Republicans are always concerned about government spending. I think that they gave in on the discretionary spending to get the Democrats to pass this, what they call bipartisan bill. And I don't think that in these tax cuts anybody is even thinking about what percentage of that is going to reduce the deficit, because it will do if you look at Kennedy's tax cuts and Reagan's tax cuts. So the deficit won't be as what they're projecting. It's still going to be high, but I think the Republicans, they actually compromised with the Democrats this time in order to get a budget through.
Keith, a good deal?
It's not a good deal, but it's the problem is the tax cuts with this spending bill add up to a real disaster. You know, Rand Paul says he didn't go to Washington to be liked, and he succeeded in,
from both sides.
From both sides. However, he has a really good point. If you look back, every time since Richard Nixon, Republicans have increased the deficit, and presidents have increased the deficit, and Democrats have reduced it. So this sort of...
Except under Obama.
No, actually, he reduced the deficit very seriously, and it's down to $400 billion. It did go up, but over time he got it back down.
It went up. Arguably, you could agree with this or not, because faced with a looming depression,
right. Well,
didn't the country need a stimulus to...
Well, here's another thing. First of all, a lot of the programs are in entitlement. They kick in, like unemployment kicks in as unemployment goes up. So a lot of that was out of his control. But by the time he got out of there, he had taken that down to levels prior to what it was before the recession. So he did do that. But the deal is that this tax bill is not, they've done the dynamic scoring. People on Wall Street have looked at it. It's going to increase the deficit up to about $1.2 trillion. And that's going to have inflationary impact. It's going to be make it difficult for businesses to borrow money. And it's just not a really good thing.
Jacob, you have your finger on the pulse of the Suncoast in terms of politics and what public opinion is. How does this play to many, particularly Republicans on the Suncoast, who for years have been concerned about the budget deficit?
I mean, I think right now the mood is, unfortunately, it's all about winning more than it is about the particular points of policy right now. And I think more than anybody feeling good or bad about this, people are mostly on edge, and the kind of the view of hypocrisy on both parties right now. Yeah, we're talking Rand Paul calling out the hypocrisy with deficit spending, but also Democrats spent a lot of time complaining about the wickedness of government shutdowns during the Obama era. Now we've had two in the span of, what, 4 weeks? And I think that more than anything, it's generally dampening enthusiasm for anybody in Washington and increasingly heightening the frustrations with hypocrisy and calling for change.
But Alan, at the end of the day, 71% of government spending is entitlements, and neither party is willing to address it.
The other big story this week was the Dow. It dropped 300 points Friday. It bounced back 300 points today, but it was still the worst week for the Dow in 2 years. And this is how it's linked to the budget deal and the tax plan that we just talked about. The Associated Press reported that the market's plunge over the past week was initially ignited by fears of higher inflation and interest rates, but the investors also had to consider a new threat, a 2-year government funding deal that would add about $300 billion to budget deficits from higher spending. The feds might want to respond by raising rates more aggressively to counter the effect of spending increases. So, Christine, I mean, does that concern folks like you that you're going to have interest rates skyrocketing over concerns about the increase in the budget deficit?
Well, I don't know if the interest rates are going to skyrocket in the short term, but we've had 9 years of almost zero interest rates. So eventually, we're going, this was coming. We had to increase the interest rates, and I think that in this particular instance, the market went up on the trajectory so fast. I mean, and everybody was knowing that it wasn't going to be sustainable, that it was going to come down. I think it's had probably a fairly, good correction now that people are going not to be as concerned. If you remember during, the 2009, the fundamentals of the economy were absolutely not there, and this is different now. The economy is very solid, and people comment that it is. It's just that there is concern about higher interest rates, and obviously the interest rates on the debt.
Well, I think that people are a little bit too concerned about interest rates going up. They do need to go up, but the fundamental problem is the economy actually has been ticking along in a fairly steady, a little bit disappointing recovery over a 9-year period. It hasn't really changed fundamentally, but we just part of why the market has been so high is there have not been a lot of other great investments, right, and we've had a ton of money poured into it, and that inflated the rate, so a correction is a little bit in order. But we're pouring now a ton more money into the economy at a time when it's already pretty hot. That is not smart economic policy.
Let me change the subject just a little bit, because I'm always trying to look at how these national stories will impact our local politics here. The ratings for 21 House seats around the country have just shifted, according to the Cook Report, which is a national organization that looks at these things, including the 16th congressional district where we live. It has always been a solid Republican district, yeah, but now, according to the Cook Report, Vern Buchanan's district is likely Republican, but not solid Republican. Jacob?
Yeah, I think it's going to be probably the toughest re-election battle that Vern Buchanan's faced since somebody else was running a few years back.
Who might that be?
But at the same time, I've got to tell you, personally, I'm going to need to see a lot more movement and a lot more change in the polls before I think this seat is anywhere close to a swing seat.
Keith, let me ask you about that, because I'm unaware of any public polls done on this congressional district, and I'm wondering, therefore, what is this based on?
Well, the Cook Report uses just numbers on, little models and projections and so forth. And, it went from strong Republican to likely Republican. That isn't a significant change. It doesn't mean that it's still not an uphill battle for my friend David Shapiro, just so everybody knows I'm supporting him and I think he's a great candidate. It's a tough race. But I think part of what you're seeing all around the country is enthusiasm among Republicans isn't great. Enthusiasm among Democrats are high, and that could bring a whole bunch of districts into play, including this one, that you wouldn't ordinarily think could be.
We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, Christine, we're going to go to you first. We'll be back in just a moment. And our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Christine, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to that, because as we mentioned in the last break, that a number of seats around the country are going from solid Republican to likely Republican, including the 16th congressional district. Does that mean that Republicans around here have to be more on their toes this time around since the last real competitive race, which was the guy sitting next to you?
Right, right. Well, I think the Democrats have a challenge generally around the country and specifically of this race we're talking about, because other than illegal immigration, I don't know what the Democratic agenda is in terms of the messaging. What are they telling the American people that they stand for? If you also look, Trump's approval rate has actually ticked up to about 40%. The feeling generally in the country is the economy seems to be picking up. And you know, we can rattle off all the statistics, but the economy is picking up. People are feeling a little bit better about the future. And there was a recent poll that showed the Democratic lead in terms of congressional races has actually dropped somewhat.
That is
so
true.
I think that Republicans are not, I mean, I think they're going to stay on their toes.
And I ask this question all the time, and I still have not gotten a good answer. Other than saying we don't like Trump, what is the Democratic message? I mean, I look everywhere, I read everywhere, and I don't see a consistent economic message that is going to win back white middle-class voters that the Democrats have been losing.
Well, I actually agree with you on that. I think the Democrats have a problem in this. Something odd happened over the last 20, 30 years, and that is the Democrats in an odd kind of way became the conservative party because they became the defenders of the status quo. And so their legacy is to be progressive and advocating for change, and they've been in this sort of rearguard action of saying let's not change things any more than they ought to be. I think you saw a little bit of movement back to a clearer progressive voice, and I think one of the problems we have in our society is too much inequality, too much is bad, and I think that's going to be a theme that we're going to see coming out.
But Jacob, we often hear Democrats have gone too far to the left, too liberal, Republicans too far to the right.
Well, I think that you've got to remember in a midterm, it's not so much about winning the middle, it's about exciting the base. So in terms of that, I would have to say, I don't know that the Democrats need an economic message in November. They'll need one in 2020. But right now, they've got cultural waves that are boosting up the loyalty for their party.
Okay, and we'll have to leave it there. Thank you all. Before we go, we want to share with you what some of you had to say about last night's show about insurance for your pets. We love our pets, but just like healthcare, insurance for our pets can be expensive. It can cost up to $40 a month for a dog, $20 a month for a cat. We went to Facebook to hear your thoughts. Marilyn says, I wish we did, one with heart disease, the other with a diabetic. Meds are outrageous. And Jessica says, all it takes is one catastrophe, which I have had, as well as several mini disasters, to make you glad you can provide your pet with whatever medical care is necessary. And Janice says, I kind of wished I had taken it out. My dog cost me over $4,000 for surgery on her knee, not including the medications. Well, if you'd like to join the conversation about tonight's topic, just visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/mysuncoast.com.abc7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. And for the latest on local breaking news, don't forget to download the updated version of our app. If your current app doesn't work, it's expired, just go to the App Store and re-download it by searching for WWSB or My Suncoast. We want to thank all our guests for being here tonight. Christine Hughes of the Sarasota Republican Party, former State Representative Keith Fitzgerald, and Jacob Ogles, the political editor of SRQ Magazine.